What's up guys, we are back with another Battlefield video, and today we're going to be talking about 5 features from Battlefield 1 I'd like to see in Battlefield 2026, or at least in some capacity. Some of these are controversial, we're going to be doing this for pretty much every recent Battlefield game, so just some of the best features from each one that we'd like to see in Battlefield 2026, and so some of these do conflict with each other. Like I'm going to talk about certain types of classes or certain stuff with certain guns in some of the videos that might overlap, but it pretty much is, if some of these are included, I think it would have the potential to improve the game. And some of them, especially for this game, are definitely more ambitious features, stuff that definitely could have been misses, and I think in a similar vein, they did stuff in Battlefield 2042 that was ambitious and ended up not working out great. So a lot of this required very good timing and very good maps and just sort of a good time period for all of it to come together. But for some of these very cool stuff that may not have worked in other Battlefield games, but I'm just going to go off the execution that they had in this game, and I think if they have stuff that's similar to this in Battlefield 2026, we'll be in for a great year. So a lot of it is to do with the sort of fun stuff they added to Battlefield 1, stuff that made the game just a lot more interesting, varied up the gameplay a lot. Some of it might not be the most skillful stuff, or stuff that people would say, yeah, this is a super competitive, high skill ceiling game. Some of it, in some ways, took away from that, but it's super fun stuff, and especially when you're playing with friends, it was stuff that made the game a lot better, in my opinion. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is operations. This, I think, is kind of a no-brainer. I don't really think there's a negative to this, especially if the game has a few maps that are similar to each other. So you can sort of do a desert map to a desert map, or you can kind of go a city map to a city map, or a city map to a like suburban map, and sort of flow in operations. Now, it won't be like battle based, I assume, like Battlefield 1 was, because it's not, at least to our knowledge, a historically based game. But they can do it where you're sort of just flowing through battle. So what you do in the previous battle influences where you go in the next one, and they can kind of just flow together. You can just click play operations, and you can sit there for a couple hours and just play continuously. You don't have to worry about the setting changing every single time or having to queue up to a new game in a new lobby. It sort of just flows. And that was one of the coolest parts of operations, is it really took you on the journey through multiple servers, multiple games, and it felt like you were kind of always working towards something, which was pretty cool. And so operations was definitely one of the more ambitious things they did with Battlefield 1. I think it was one of the most successful. It just created an environment that was super awesome and felt super immersive to the time period, but also just to the gameplay, that each map you played actually mattered to what you were going to play next, which is pretty rare in any shooter. And so I think definitely a positive. Operations could be implemented in any capacity, but just a type of game mode that sort of flows between map to map. Feature number 2 is Behemoths. So this one's probably the first on the controversial side. A lot of people did not like Behemoths because they were sort of a bailout to the teams that were losing. It really made it where, you know, you feel like you're dominating a team and playing really well, and all of a sudden they have a Zeppelin come out of the sky that just gives them a free 2 flags, basically, because they can just bulldoze out of their spawn. But I honestly don't think Battlefield should be taken as seriously as like a hyper-competitive game. I think this definitely gives it just a lot more dynamic gameplay, where if you got a team stuck in that spawn trap in a lot of other Battlefields, you're pretty much just, the game's over. You can maybe take a plane or helicopter and try to fly to the other side, drop out to a flag, which is pretty fun in itself, but there aren't too many ways to get out of that spawn trap, especially if the team who put you in the spawn trap is really good. And a lot of the time, if they have you captured on 5 flags, there's a reason they did that. So I think Behemoth is a good way to get out of it. Something else they did was, in one of the DLCs, I believe it was Turning Tides, they gave both teams a dreadnought to start off, and whichever team did better got a second dreadnought. So that's sort of a skill-based way, I guess, or kind of skill-based way to give a second dreadnought later in the game. But most of the time, it was if your team was losing, you basically got a bit of a bailout. But if a team's really good at countering it as well, it won't really matter. I'd say generally the better team will win either way. So I think it's a pretty awesome way to do things. I don't know how it would look in a modern setting. You could probably do an AC-130. You could do just a cruise ship. I mean, there's a lot of ways to go with it that I think would be super awesome and engaging. So I definitely think something where you have a big power up come in, especially when teams losing, to get them out of it. It varies the gameplay a lot. I liked that when a lot of these would die or when you would kill them, they would be littered all over the map and they would actually change the gameplay similar to Levolution. So I think that's another cool way to do it. Obviously, the Zeppelin is so dramatic. There's really not much in Modern Combat that's that big because it honestly wasn't that practical. But having that fall all over the map and you can climb in and out of the ruins was super sick. So I don't know how they would necessarily do it in Battlefield 2026, but something like that just sort of brings in the spectacle of war and just sort of the big, huge battles, I think would be super sick. And so, again, I don't know how they'll do it with Modern Combat, but something in that vein I think could be super cool. Feature number 3 is elite classes. They can definitely do this. It was also a way to vary up gameplay. This is a little more... it wasn't as much of a bailout. Both teams could get these. Even if you were winning, you could still get them. I know on some of the smaller maps, they use this in place of the Behemoths to sort of give the team that was losing an upper hand. But these are way less overpowered. If you go against a good player that was using them, it was really hard to take them down because they'd be spawning by the medics. They'd be making sure that they always were resupplied or healed. They wouldn't be over aggressive. But I even saw a Reddit post and I was looking up some of the details on this old stuff, like the names of all the elites. And people were just complaining that there's too many morons that use these and just run out and die right away. So obviously, if they were that overpowered, there wouldn't be people complaining that the people who pick them up die too quick. So I think that this is a pretty cool way, and even a middle ground of Behemoths if you don't want to go all the way. I know on a lot of previous Battlefields they had the battle pickup system, which I think is also a cool way. But again, as far as like creating fun Battlefield moments, clips you can post, using the elite classes is a cool way to do it. And I've changed my opinion on this a lot over time. I don't think 4 or 5 years ago I really would have recommended the Behemoths or the elite classes, but we've seen them sort of dumb down a lot of this stuff in some of the recent games where they don't want to have as many spectacles. They don't necessarily want to have like as much crazy overpowered stuff. And to be honest, it somewhat does take away from the Battlefield moments that are created. So I think having this stuff that's in a way where it doesn't take over the game, it's not something that only gets given to bad players. It's not something that only kind of dominates the game. It happens here and there each game, and it's something that anybody can get to at least an extent. I think is a good way to do it. Number 4 would be melee combat. I think they had a really good balance to the melee combat in this game. You could use knives, you could do bayonet charges, you could take people down from behind. I think there was a lot of cool and satisfying stuff. I think something too that they could have even added to this is adding a feature similar to what Call of Duty has in Black Ops 6 with the sort of taking a hostage. I think that'd be a pretty cool way to do it. I'm also going to mention when I do the Battlefield Hardline video that I think the melee in that game is really good too, and kind of has a cool balance of like speed versus one-hit kill, and just sort of giving you options with melee rather than just only having a knife. I also think the fact that like people can't just do this circle mash like kind of counter that they had in Battlefield 4. I don't think too many people like that. I definitely think the bayonet charge is a really cool system. It's pretty well balanced in my opinion. I mean, if somebody's like coming around a corner, you can kind of use it tactically, and you'll see that in some of the gameplay where if I'm one shot and I know that they're about to run around the corner and shoot me, I'll just pre-pop a bayonet charge, and sometimes it works. I think there is a skill to when you can use it. If you use it wrong, you're just going to run into someone and get taken out by their teammates, get shot before you get there, and then if you use it and don't hit anyone, you're stuck walking for like 10 seconds. So I think there's a lot of positives and negatives to the sort of melee combat in this game, and I think that's really awesome. And again, they don't need to port this feature directly. Most people don't have bayonets on their guns like in modern era, and so they don't necessarily have to do exactly what they did in Battlefield 1, but I'm more so just getting at the idea of creating melee combat that has a lot of give and take. Like there's a lot of positives and negatives and risk taking you can do with it. I think having a system in Battlefield 2026 with that would be really awesome. Now, lastly is the historical setting, the graphics, and the immersion. I'm grouping all these into one. I would just say the historical setting, but obviously we're not going back to Battlefield 1, or I guess World War 1. And so I will say just sort of the world building they did and sort of the immersion they do is probably best in the series, in my opinion. Like, they really, really, really get you into every single map. The graphics are incredible. The fog, the gas, the rain, everything looks amazing in this game. And so creating sort of that graphical and visual immersion is, I think, should be a priority in Battlefield 2026. I think to someone that's playing the game and isn't necessarily the best at the game, even if you're going like 12-12 or even 8-15, but you're contributing to your team, you're helping with vehicles, the immersion kind of like takes away from that. Whereas a lot of the games that have zero immersion, all you're focused on is the scoreboard, all you're focused on is getting kills. If you're not having the best game, it just takes you out of it immediately and you want to rage quit and don't enjoy it. But I found myself when I was playing some of this gameplay, I mean, I'm like a super competitive guy. When I play Call of Duty, Battlefield, other shooters, if I'm not, going double, triple positive, I feel like I'm having a bad game and I just didn't have a good time. But there's plenty of games here where I was trying to go for gameplay and I would go like 15-15, but I still had a super fun time because you just really felt like you were a part of the battle on the front line and moving back and forth. That kind of goes back into point number one with operations, where that really does give you that feeling of pushing the front line back and forth. And I think that's something that, all in all, would be awesome in Battlefield 2026. So I think Battlefield 1 was one of the best entries into the franchise. At first, I didn't necessarily like it because it's missing a lot of things, like the customization with the weapons. It's missing like a lot of gadgets. And I think the vehicle gameplay is like not the best compared to the other entries in the franchise. But what it did and what it aimed to do, it did really well. So if we can get some of these features implemented into Battlefield 2026 and cherry pick some awesome features from the other games, I think we're in for a really good title. So I'm going to be doing these videos for most of the recent Battlefield games. If you guys have some features that you love from a specific Battlefield game, just drop it down below and I'll check it out, think about it, and maybe add it to the next video. And if you're not, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.